Light rain streaked down the glass facade of Orion Systems' towering headquarters. 40 floors above the street, tension thickened the air in a high-stakes conference room. Blueprints crowded the sleek glass table, and a group of brilliant engineers debated, their voices rising with frustration. A strategic AI server worth $100 million had gone down, just hours before a critical demo to government contractors. Every passing minute burned tens of thousands in potential losses. On that same floor, but strategically invisible, Jack Turner rolled a quiet cleaning cart down the hallway. Dressed in his janitor uniform, he moved methodically, staying out of everyone's way. Truthfully, no one noticed him. But Jack wasn't always a janitor. 5 years ago, Jack held a very different title: lead systems engineer at one of the top aerospace defense firms in the country. He had designed navigation and cooling systems for military aircraft, technologies where a single error could mean loss of life. Jack was known as a genius in thermal dynamics, a man with patents to his name and teams under his leadership. Everything changed when his wife, Sarah, was diagnosed with an aggressive form of breast cancer. Jack stepped away from engineering to care for her and their toddler son, Max. For 18 months, he played nurse, father, and emotional anchor. When Sarah passed, Jack faced an impossible choice: dive back into a demanding technical career and put Max in daycare, or find a humble job that let him show up for every school pickup. He chose fatherhood over prestige. Today, Jack cleans offices at night so he can be with Max during the day. It's not glamorous. No one at Orion knows about his past. He keeps it that way to avoid pity, questions, or awkward glances. To them, Jack is just the quiet guy with the mop who does a good job and keeps to himself. But sometimes, brilliance waits in silence. Just a few floors up from Jack's janitorial closet, CEO Evelyn Cross stared at a blinking red error light. Her face was unreadable, part disbelief, part fury. Evelyn had clawed her way to the top, transforming a modest software startup into Orion Systems, a giant in artificial intelligence. She was known throughout the tech world for being shrewd, extremely focused, and unapologetically tough. Today, all her professional battles boiled down to this moment. The company's flagship AI defense server, a machine poised to secure the company's biggest government deal, had crashed during final startup. Nothing worked: reboots, fail-safes, even emergency overrides. With just 3 hours until the demonstration, her best engineers, graduates of MIT, Stanford, and Caltech, worked obsessively, trying to diagnose the system failure. As pressure mounted, Evelyn glanced at the time, her stomach sinking. And just down the hallway, the answer quietly pushed a mop. Jack moved past the glass conference room, where raised voices echoed urgent technical jargon. He wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but he'd once worked on systems even more complicated than what they were discussing now. "Thermal sensors are returning inconsistent data," one engineer shouted. "Could be a pressure differential," another shot back. "We've checked that 3 times already." Jack halted mid-step. Those words stirred long-hidden knowledge. Heat imbalances, misreading sensors, emergency shutdowns. He'd faced this before in jet aircraft systems where similar failures led to major airborne crashes. He hesitated. Should he say something? He was just the janitor now. They wouldn't take him seriously. But standing in that corridor, Jack couldn't ignore what he knew. He turned back and walked toward the door. "Excuse me," Jack said, gently knocking on the glass. Inside, a project lead looked up, frowning. "This is a secure meeting." "I understand," Jack said calmly, "but I think I know what's causing your server issue." The room quieted slightly, but not with interest, only irritation. "You'll need to leave immediately," the manager said dismissively. But Evelyn Cross had been watching. And in Jack's voice, she caught something familiar, not arrogance but certainty. She stood up and asked, "What are you talking about?" Jack stepped forward but didn't cross the threshold. I believe your backup thermal sensor is misreporting pressure, causing the system to think it's overheating, even though it's not. It's a known issue in systems with dual cooling loops. The lead engineer scoffed. We've checked every sensor. But did you isolate the backup thermal sensor in the secondary loop? Jack asked. If there's even a slight pressure difference, it could trigger a false overheat condition. In aerospace, anything over 0.75 psi activates a shutdown. Everyone stared at the screen. One reading flashed, 0.78. The room went dead silent. This was just the beginning. Jack Turner wasn't just a janitor. He was about to rewrite the story, not just for the server, not just for the company, but for himself and for his son, Max, watching from the sidelines. All it took was the courage to speak up. The temperature in the Orion Systems conference room seemed to rise with every passing moment, not because of faulty sensors, but from stress, urgency, and frustration. It was still early morning, yet the walls radiated tension as if the failure had leaked into the structure itself. Around the oval glass table, a dozen of the world's top engineers, programmers, and system architects were locked in a verbal traffic jam, tossing around theories, running protocols, reaching one dead end after another. CEO Evelyn Cross, more steel than skin under pressure, stood silent at the head of the room, arms crossed, eyes sharper than the charts on the screen. Her voice cut through the chaos like a scalpel. 3 hours, that's all we have to restore functionality. Then the contractors walk through that door. If this server doesn't boot, the project is over. $100 million. Gone. Years of reputation. Gone. No one responded. What could they say? Their brilliant solution, their highly anticipated AI defense core system, had locked down during final startup. It was a catastrophic failure of a supposedly fail-proof platform. The bigger problem, no one could tell why. Across the room, diagnostic screens flickered with logs, error codes, and thermal readouts. Cooling systems that were meant to be self-regulating instead showed fluctuating pressure. The server's AI had interpreted the values as overheating and entered full protective lockdown, essentially bricking itself to avoid damage. But this was no consumer laptop. This was a bleeding-edge quantum neural processor system designed for high-level national defense operations. And today, it was supposed to prove its worth to the Department of Defense. Now, it might prove the company's undoing. Just outside the conference room, the hall smelled faintly of lemon-scented cleaner and fresh coffee. The world beyond those glass walls was still moving. Jack Turner, the man with the mop, pushed his cart past the room just like usual. Steam rose from his bucket, tools of his trade neatly organized, shoes silent on the polished marble floors. He wasn't planning to stop. He never did. But something in the raised voices caught his attention. It's the thermal array. Sensor feedback loop is showing inconsistencies. The psi readings don't match between primary and backup cooling. Everything checks out, all green individually, but together it's failing to sync. Jack slowed. Something in those words stirred an uncomfortable familiarity, like hearing the early rattle of an engine you used to build by hand. He tilted his head slightly and kept walking, pretending to align a trash bin, but he listened more closely. Well, we isolated the redundant loop. Nothing changed. Maybe it's electrical noise. Quantum processors are heat-sensitive. That's not it. Check the sensors again. Jack's mind was slipping back to a different conference room, years ago, surrounded by men and women in uniform. Fighter jets, sensor protocols, emergency shutdown errors during flight tests. He remembered the problem exactly. Backup thermal sensor drift. A tiny pressure differential between the primary and backup lines caused the onboard system to believe the subsystems were overheating, triggering an auto shutdown before anything dangerous actually happened. Common in dual-loop cooling systems. Jack frowned. He couldn't just walk in and tell them they'd missed something so basic. He was a janitor now. No badge, no title, no authority. They won't listen, he thought, and why should they? But the failure clearly wasn't their expertise failing. It was their inability to see the bigger picture. And Jack had spent a lifetime designing systems that worked in high-G conditions, extreme altitudes, and hostile environments. Servers shut down safely. Planes don't. He couldn't ignore this. Jack sucked in a breath, stepped forward, and knocked. Inside the room, the knock barely registered at first, like background noise. It came again, gentle but intentional. Finally, the project manager opened the door. "Can I help you?" he asked, brows furrowed. "I'm sorry to interrupt," Jack said, calmly but confidently. "But I think I know why your system's locking out. It's your backup temperature sensor." The manager blinked. "This is a secure meeting," he said flatly, "and quite frankly, this isn't the time." Evelyn Cross turned her head toward the doorway, drawn by something she couldn't quite define. Not just Jack's words, but his tone. The natural cadence of a man who wasn't guessing. She narrowed her eyes. "Explain." Jack nodded once and pointed inside. "I overheard talk about pressure differential between your cooling systems. Based on what I heard, it's likely your backup thermal sensor is registering false high-pressure conditions during startup. The system thinks it's overheating, so it goes into fail-safe shutdown. You've been checking the cooling loops, not the pressure sensor calibration." The lead engineer scoffed. "And you are?" "Jack Turner. I clean the 37th and 40th floors." The room remained silent, hovering between disbelief and insult. "Look," Jack continued, professional and unbothered. "In military aerosystems, anything above 0.75 psi was flagged as unsafe by outdated sensor protocols. Yours reads 0.78 right now. It's just enough to trigger panic behavior, shutting the system down, even if everything's cooled and fine." Another engineer leaned toward a terminal, checking the diagnostic readout. "And oh wow, he's right. That's within panic threshold," a second muttered. Jack offered a solution. "Bypass the backup sensor temporarily, manually reset the thermal control circuit, run only the primary loop. That'll stabilize the heat readings long enough for reboot." The head engineer turned to Evelyn, tense. "It's a risk, but not a dumb one. If he's right, we're back up in minutes. If he's wrong, we're still dead in the water." Evelyn made the call, one sharp nod. "Do it." 3 nerve-wracking minutes passed. Screens flickered, processors spun fan cycles, system status lights blinked yellow. Then, one by one, every light turned green. First the cooling array, then the CPU grid, then the quantum neural matrix. Monitors flooded with readouts. System stable, thermal equilibrium achieved, AI core online. Someone in the back let out a breath they didn't realize they were holding. Holy crap, it's working." "Everything's back," the lead engineer confirmed. "No errors, no shutdown triggers, systems fully operational." And slowly, everyone turned to face Jack Turner, still standing at the doorway, mop in hand, expression unreadable. Evelyn Cross approached him. Now face to face, her tone lowered, nearly a whisper. "Who are you really?" Jack hesitated, then answered simply, "Someone who used to work on systems where pressure mattered." That was all he said, and all he needed to. The moment lingered like an echo in a canyon. Jack nodded politely. "I'd stay for a debrief, but I have to pick up my son from school." And with quiet confidence, he walked away. Later that afternoon, Evelyn couldn't stop thinking about the custodian who just saved her company from collapse. Something in his eyes, his language, the calm clarity of a man who'd done this before. She called her assistant, pull his employment file. What she found knocked her back in her chair. Name Jack Turner. Former position, Lead Systems Engineer, Lockheed Martin. Specialization: Thermal Systems, Avionics, AI Circuitry Integration. Patents held, 12. Worked on cooling and navigation systems for F-35 fighter jet program. Reason for career gap: personal circumstances. Current status: night shift custodian. Emergency contact: Max Turner, age 8 son. Evelyn closed the file slowly, letting the implications marinate. Her mind replayed his words. Someone who used to work on systems where pressure mattered. The next day, Jack stood outside his son Max's school, coffee in hand, hoodie zipped up against the wind. Evelyn Cross pulled up in a black company car, stepped out carefully. She wasn't here as a CEO, she was here for something else. "Mr. Turner," she said. Jack stood tall. "I'd like to offer you a position," Evelyn continued. "Senior Systems Engineer at Orion. Salaries $200,000, flexible hours, full benefits, work from home options on non-demo days." Jack blinked. "Miss Cross, that's generous. But I have one consideration," he said. "My son, I need to be there for him. I left aerospace for a reason." Before she could speak, a small whirlwind of motion burst from the school doors. "Dad," Max, 8 years old, backpack bouncing, smile wide. He spotted Evelyn, slowed, and whispered, "Is she your boss?" Jack chuckled, "Something like that." Evelyn knelt down, uncharacteristically soft. "Your dad is very smart," she told Max, "and he saved something really important yesterday." Max grinned like he already knew. "He knows everything about computers," he whispered proudly. "Before Mommy got sick, he used to build things that flew." Behind them, Jack's eyes glazed ever so slightly. He hadn't heard Max talk about Sarah in weeks. In that moment, Evelyn understood. This man never lost his brilliance. He just chose love. Monday morning at Orion Systems looked the same: polished floors, buzzing elevators, sharp suits moving through glass corridors. But to Jack Turner, everything felt different. He wasn't pushing a mop today. He was stepping into a new life. Wearing a simple button-down and carrying nothing but a digital tablet and a small thermos of coffee, Jack entered the building not as a night cleaner, but as the new Senior Systems Engineer. No fanfare, no announcements. Just a fresh ID badge and an office keycard that unlocked more than just glass doors. It unlocked the part of Jack that had been asleep for the past 5 years. Evelyn Cross had kept her promise: flexible hours, no media announcements, full control over his schedule. She wanted his voice where it mattered, but she also respected what mattered most to him: his son, Max. Jack dropped Max off at school like always, stopped by his favorite coffee cart, and then took the elevator to the 35th floor, where the core engineering team met each morning. The glass doors slid open quietly. Inside, whiteboards scribbled with formulas, engineers hunched over schematics, processors laid out like surgical tables. Every head turned when Jack walked in. Some stared in confusion. Wasn't that the janitor? One or two whispered, but Evelyn's presence at his side silenced the room. "I want to take a moment," she said without preamble, "to introduce someone who helped us when no one else could." Jack stood by her side, quiet and respectful. "Last week, our flagship system failed 3 hours before a live defense demo. None of our top engineers could stop the system from shutting down. But one man listened, observed, and figured it out in 5 minutes." She looked at Jack. He was mopping our floors at the time. The room went very still. "This is Jack Turner, the newest member of our engineering team. He may not have walked in with an Ivy League resume, but some of the best talent doesn't arrive through the front door." Jack smiled modestly, gave a nod. No ego, no swagger, just steady eyes that had seen failure and kept going anyway. After the meeting, curious engineers began approaching him. "You really used to work with fighter jets." What made you think the sensor was the issue? Is the 0.75 psi threshold a universal thing, or just aerospace? Jack answered each question with warmth and clarity. He didn't rush. He didn't perform. He simply shared knowledge, offering insights that were simple but sharp. By lunch, he was no longer the janitor who saved the server. He was just Jack, the engineer who saw what they missed, not because he was smarter, but because he looked at the problem differently. Later that week, Max visited his dad after school, walking cautiously into the Orion Systems development lab with wide-eyed wonder. The place looked like a spaceship. Jack introduced him gently. "This is Max, my son, aspiring engineer currently mastering third-grade math." The team chuckled. Max clutched a lunchbox and whispered, "Is this where you fixed the $100 million machine?" Jack smiled. "Yeah, right over there." Max walked straight to a terminal, touched the blinking lights, and turned to one of the engineers. "Do those chips get really hot too?" That engineer blinked. "They do, actually." "Do you use special cooling?" Max asked seriously. "Because me and Dad are building one at home for my science fair." And just like that, Max became the lab's unofficial mascot. That same week, Jack received his first real assignment: review and improve the thermal design of Orion's upcoming civilian AI chip. The company had received complaints about overheating in their consumer prototype, something no one had connected yet to the architecture of their defense system. Jack stayed late that night, but not to prove anything to anyone. He simply loved the work again. It felt like stretching after a long sleep. Ideas flowed, confidence returned. Not in a flash, but through quiet progress. He wasn't trying to catch up. He was adding value immediately. His time spent away from engineering hadn't dulled his mind. It had simply refined what mattered most. Still, the transition wasn't all smooth. Some colleagues were unsure. One even asked, half joking, half jabbing, "So, are we just hiring janitors as engineers now?" Jack gave a half smile and replied gently, "Only if they're qualified." But it stung, not because of the doubt, but because it reminded him that the world still sees people through titles first. It just made him more determined to change that. Over the next month, Jack proved himself not with fancy presentations, but with solutions that worked. He spotted latency risks others missed. He optimized cooling patterns without needing expensive redesigns. He rejected applause, gave credit, and continued picking Max up from school every single day. One day in the cafeteria, he saw Maria, the woman who replaced his night shift after he left custodial services. She sat alone, gray uniform, eyes on her sandwich. Jack grabbed a tray and sat across from her. "Mind if I join you?" Maria looked startled. "You're the new engineer now. People call you a genius." Jack chuckled. "I call myself someone who understands how to clean an office properly." She laughed softly. Jack nodded toward the room. "People learn your name yet?" Maria shook her head. "They will," Jack said. "But until they do, just know someone sees you." From that day forward, he greeted every custodial worker, every security guard, and every assistant by name. And as Jack's influence subtly spread, so did the culture at Orion. It started with eye contact, then smiles, then genuine connections. His quiet respect for the people who once ignored him became a quiet revolution inside the company. One evening a few weeks later, Jack and Max sat at their tiny apartment's living room table, surrounded by pizza boxes, blueprints, and wires. "Science fair's coming up," Jack said. "You ready?" Max nodded eagerly. He held up a cooling prototype they'd built together. It used airflow theory and heat sink conduction, the same principles Jack had once patented for military tech, just scaled down with Lego motors and aluminum foil. "Do you think I'll win?" Max asked. Jack smiled. "It doesn't matter," he said. "All that matters is that you understand what you're building and that you're proud of it." Max grinned, "I am." So was Jack. 3 months later, Jack Turner stood at the front of Orion Systems' main presentation room, sunlight pouring through the floor-to-ceiling windows. On the screen behind him flashed the title, Revolutionary Thermal Optimization for Scalable AI Systems. On any other day, this might have been intimidating. A full executive boardroom, CEO Evelyn Cross seated, investors on video call, and several senior engineers silently watching. But Jack wasn't nervous. Not today. He wasn't here to impress. He was here to solve a problem, the same way he always had. He began speaking in his usual calm, grounded tone. "We've invested millions into performance, but heat is still our silent enemy. Even the most efficient processors choke when we underestimate thermal constraints. That's not just a technical flaw, it's a business risk." He tapped through the slides. Using an adaptive loop performance model, built on lessons from aerospace-grade multi-sensor alignment, we can reduce cooling system load by 38%, increase longevity by 22%, with near-zero risk of emergency shutdowns. Evelyn sat up slightly. A regional executive leaned forward. Another engineer whispered, "Wait, does that eliminate our current latency during high-load AI tasks?" Jack nodded. With intelligent phase switching and real-time heat redistribution, yes. There was a pause, silence the good kind. He continued, not rushing. "I didn't redesign the system from scratch," he concluded. "I just noticed what it was already trying to do and helped it do it better." The room erupted in applause, not just for the brilliant design, but for who it came from. After the meeting, Evelyn asked Jack to walk with her through the executive wing. "You realize," she said, "that presentation could save us millions in operating costs across our entire infrastructure." Jack shrugged modestly. "I'm just glad it made sense." Evelyn looked at him more closely. "You don't talk like a systems guy." He smirked. "I used to talk like one. Now I talk like a dad explaining homework." They both laughed, but Evelyn grew thoughtful. "Jack, you reminded me of something I've forgotten. For years, I built this place by surrounding myself with impressive credentials, PhDs, Ivy League MBAs, people with perfect resumes. And yet..." She gestured toward the windows. "The man who taught me the most about innovation, humility, and courage arrived with a mop, not a degree stamp." Jack stayed quiet, letting the moment sit. She stopped walking, turned toward him. "How do we make sure we never miss the next Jack Turner?" Jack answered without hesitation. "Stop looking only at qualifications. Start looking for curiosity, grit, purpose. Good ideas don't know what uniform you're wearing." Evelyn nodded, truly listening. That weekend, Jack and Max were back at the kitchen table, building their science fair project. Aluminum fins, paper diagrams, wires running like rivers across cardboard. Max was full of stories from school. "One of my friends said his dad drives a Tesla and knows someone in Google." "Oh yeah," Jack said, screwing in a heat shield. "What do I say when people ask what you do now?" Jack smiled, paused for a moment. "Well, what do you think I do?" Max grinned. "You save broken computers and build cool stuff with lights." "Fair enough." Max hesitated. "Do you miss cleaning?" Jack took a breath, thinking. "I miss how quiet it was. I got a lot of thinking done, but I don't miss feeling invisible." Max nodded thoughtfully. "You were never invisible to me, Dad." Jack swallowed, caught off guard by the simple honesty. Those words meant more than any job title ever could. At the science fair, Max stood proudly beside their joint project, how to stop computers from overheating. A small fan hummed beside a diagram labeled Thermal Redistribution Pathways. Teachers smiled, parents nodded. The judges were clearly impressed by Max's detailed explanations. When one asked how he learned so much, Max answered proudly, "My dad used to fix fighter jets and stuff. Now he builds mega computers. He's really smart, but he still picks me up every day." Every parent in earshot turned to see Jack, holding a coffee, smiling humbly near the back wall. If there was one moment he wished Sarah could have seen, it was this. Not the applause, not the big score. Just this. The pride in their son's voice. Back at Orion Systems, Jack now worked 3 core days a week on site and 2 remotely. His calendar reflected meetings, design reviews, and brainstorming sessions, but it also had Max pickup and homework hour blocked out without apology. Others noticed and quietly started setting their own boundaries too. Jack didn't just change systems, he changed culture. He became known not for what he once did, but how he did it now. One day, a newly hired intern asked him nervously, "So is it true? You started here as a janitor?" Jack smiled. "No," he said. "I started as a dad just trying to keep going." Inside a glowing glass atrium at Orion Systems headquarters, a quiet ripple of change was taking shape, and at its center stood a man who once pushed a mop down these same halls. Jack Turner, now senior systems engineer, wasn't on the cover of any magazines. He'd politely declined interview requests, press features, and executive spotlights. Evelyn Cross had offered, but Jack's answer was simple. "I didn't fix the server for recognition. I spoke up because something was failing, and I could help." What mattered more was how his story changed the people around him. It started small. A developer who once never spoke to the custodial staff now greeted every janitor by name. A systems analyst realized maybe a quiet resume wasn't an empty one, just unread. And Evelyn herself. She rewrote Orion's hiring policy to include a program for non-traditional engineers. Veterans, technicians, community college grads, caregivers returning to the workforce, people with undocumented brilliance. Jack reviewed every application personally, because he was one of them. Meanwhile, 8-year-old Max had fully embraced life in the tech world. He was now a regular fixture at the Orion campus after school, welcomed by the staff, spoiled by the cafeteria team, and revered by engineers who fought over who got to answer his curious questions. One day, Max walked into a team meeting with a notepad and asked, "Do you think AI gets hot feelings or just hot chips?" Everyone laughed, but Jack noticed an engineer jotting the question down. Later, he admitted, "Actually, that's a useful metaphor for how we visualize emotional modeling under processor load. That kid's smarter than me some days." Jack smiled. He gets it from his mom. One morning, Evelyn stopped Jack on the way out of the elevator. "We're hosting a leadership event next month," she said. "Keynote speakers, VC partners, government reps, I want you to close it out." Jack blinked. Me. Who better to talk about unseen talent, unseen value? Jack considered it. "I'm not used to stages." "Good," Evelyn said. "We've heard from enough people who are." He chuckled and agreed. The day of the event arrived. Hundreds of suits filled the room. The company's top minds showcased new tech, market forecasts, advances in quantum learning, and reinforced Orion's place in the future. Then lights dimmed. Evelyn stepped to the mic with simple authority. "I'd like to close this event with a story. Not about data, not about systems, about the people behind the machines and the ones we often overlook." She turned. "Jack Turner, would you join me?" Jack walked on stage in the same calm, easy manner he had the day he knocked on a glass door and saved a $100 million server. The room waited. Jack looked out, then down, not nervous, just intentional. "I wasn't always an engineer at Orion," he began. "Some of you already know that." A few nods around the room. "I once cleaned these offices at night, fixed coffee machines, took out the trash." He paused, and one day I overheard a system failing because it was interpreting false pressure data. I remembered solving a problem just like it years ago, back in aerospace, before my wife got sick, and my son needed me more than my title did. He looked up. I stepped away from engineering because being a father came first. I stepped back into it because being present didn't mean my talents disappeared. Jack turned slightly, addressing the leadership team seated in front. I didn't speak up that morning for credit. I didn't expect to be noticed. But sometimes silence can cost more than speaking out, especially when you're holding a solution. He let that sit. Then came his ending. Look beyond job titles. Look past the resume. Look for the ones who listen deeply and solve quietly. Brilliance shows up, it just doesn't always wear a suit. The room, filled with executives, analysts, government partners, and rising leaders, gave a standing ovation. Not for performance, but for truth. Later that evening, back at home, Jack sat across from Max at their kitchen table. The old aerospace textbooks that once collected dust were now mixed with Max's third-grade science homework. Max had a new question every day. Can we design a robot that waters the plants when we go visit Grandma? How come some computers crash but others do? Is it cooler to drive jets or build the systems that fly them? Jack loved every one of them. They didn't remind him of the time he lost. They reminded him of the legacy he was choosing to build now. Sometime later, a junior engineer stopped Jack in the hallway. I just wanted to say thank you, she said. I joined through the new program. I never thought I could work at a place like this. I used to fix car engines with my uncle. Jack smiled. That's how I learned airflow dynamics. You mean? He nodded. She laughed. I'm glad people like us are getting a chance. People who start slow. People who don't look qualified but think 5 layers deep. Jack nodded. Keep showing up. Talent gets noticed, even if it takes time. She walked off with a bounce in her step. Jack turned and looked out at the Orion Systems logo gleaming on the far wall. It used to be a symbol of distance. Now it was one of proof. In his journal that night, something Sarah had encouraged him to keep during her chemo days, Jack wrote. Success isn't returning to the life I left. It's stepping into the one Max sees in me. It's seeing every day as a shot worth taking. And reminding others. Even if no one's watching, do good work anyway. If you've ever been overlooked, underestimated, or seen only for a title, not your talent, this story is for you. Because sometimes, the quietest person in the room holds the answer everyone is searching for. Talent doesn't wear a uniform. It watches, it listens, and it shows up when the world needs it most.